Hey guys, welcome back to Sports Design School. On this episode, we're going to be talking about this Fresno State recruiting graphic. I'm going to walk you through step by step on how to recreate this look. We're going to go through how to install custom brushes and even where to find them. And we're also going to talk about some of the fonts that they use in this piece. Let's get started. Now before we dive in, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss out on any future Sports Design School tutorials. So let's jump in. I'm gonna start off by just taking a look at this Fresno State design. You can see there's the left side of the image, which has a solid red background, and then the right side of the image. And those two parts are brought together by a paper tear down the middle. It's a pretty simple effect, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. I'm gonna go over to this Photoshop document window. Essentially what I have set up so far is just a canvas that's 8.5 by 11. It's not exactly the same as what they did in this design, but it's close enough to where it can mirror a lot of the look that we're going for. So you can see they have this solid red background. That's super easy to start off with. I'm just gonna unlock the background layer, and I'm gonna go over to our color picker tool and then just choose a shade of red that works. Once I have that, I'm gonna press G to pop up the paint bucket tool. I'm gonna click. I'm gonna go back to the design. Now the other thing I wanna tackle before we dive too far into the design is creating the clipping mask that we'll use to create the right side of this design. So to do that, we're gonna need a paper tear effect. Now there are lots of different ways to do this, and you've probably seen dozens of tutorials if this is something you're interested in. I find there's one really simple way to create this effect that's pretty easy, and it's with torn paper brushes. And there's a bunch of different places that you can find these brushes. I find the easiest one to be Brush Easy. And I'll put the link down to this page down in the description so you can kind of follow along with what I'm doing. But it's super easy to do this entire process. Essentially just hit free download, that button, and then that'll go into your downloads folder. And then you're gonna go into Photoshop and you're gonna type B to pull up the brush tool. And all you're gonna do is click on the little drop down in the top left, and you're gonna click on the gear in the top right of that drop down box. And then you're gonna click on import brushes. And when you click on that button, it's gonna take you to your Finder window where you'll be able to select your download file that you just downloaded. And you're gonna be looking for the file that ends in .abr. And once you install that, you should be able to go through and see all of your newly installed brushes. So now that we have our brushes installed, we can start off with the design. So I'm just gonna create a new layer to preserve our background red layer. And I'm going to simply change my brush color to white and click in the middle like that. And then I'm just gonna click and drag to the right to make sure we cover up the rest of the screen. Easy enough. Now, if for some reason your brush isn't vertical like this, don't worry. You can simply select whatever brush you have and see how my brush is horizontal. I can go over to Window and then hit Brush Settings. And then I can just change the angle to 90 degrees. And now that rotates my brush to where it fits in the screen better. So now we have this layer on top of our red background, and we can move and drag this around. I might even scale this up a little bit to really focus in on some of those details of the brush, or not the brush, of the paper tear. And again, this isn't gonna be perfect, but it looks good enough. Now we're gonna go back to that Fresno State design. And you can see they have the bulldog head on the left side. I wasn't able to find this Fresno State bulldog head, but I do have this Georgia bulldog head. And I think that'll work for now. I'm just gonna drag it in, hit Command T or Control T to transform. And I'm just gonna drag and scale this up a little bit. That's looking good. I'm gonna center it. And then double click to the right of the layer and click color overlay. And we're gonna make sure it's on normal, and we're gonna select white. We're then gonna drag that below our paper tear layer that we created. And there we go. The other thing I noticed about the left side of this design is it's saying, Michael, welcome to the Bulldog family. And this Michael font isn't a script font. So I'm just gonna type Michael, comma. And the font I'm gonna use for this is called Drustic. And again, this isn't gonna be perfect, but it's close enough to the look that they have in order to kind of mirror some of the things that they were going for in their design. I'm gonna select a kind of dark gray color like they did. That's looking pretty good. And then the next set of text says, welcome to the Bulldog family, on 2 separate lines. So I'm gonna type, welcome to the, and then Bulldog family. So the font they use in this design is called Vanguard. And you might recognize this font. It's the font that Ohio State uses in a lot of their designs. Now the thing is, this font is $40 and it's not necessarily worth buying for this tutorial. But good news, I have a free replacement font that works pretty much just as well. It's called Anton. And we're gonna make it all caps. And I'm gonna change the color to white. That's looking pretty good. And I think there was a period at the end. Now let me backtrack a little bit. If you're interested in purchasing the Vanguard font, I'll leave the link for that down in the description. But it's on Creative Market, which is pretty much where every Division I college football program gets their fonts for their designs. So if you are looking for adding some fonts to your collection, I definitely recommend checking out Creative Market. So let's go back to our design. It's looking pretty good so far. It looks like the spacing in between these 2 lines is a little bit further than what we have, so I'm just gonna space it out a little bit more. That's good enough. And then underneath that it says Fresno State football. Nothing too complicated there. And for that, I'm just going to use Archivo Black. Again, another free font. I'll leave the link down to that in the description as well. I'm going to adjust the kerning on my letters, and you can do that by just clicking on this. It says VA, and just dragging to the right to add some spacing in between the letters. And that's looking pretty good so far. Now down here they have a head coach signature section. That's pretty simple to do, so we're not going to cover that right now. Now we're done with the left side. Let's dive into the right side of our design. So you'll go back and you'll notice it looks like there's 2 parts to this. There's the background, which appears to be the stadium, and then there's the foreground, which is a cutout of a player. So we're going to do this in 2 parts. We're going to have the background and the foreground. Now for a background, I'm just going to use this free image off of Unsplash. I'll leave the link down in the description if you want to download it as well. It's completely free to use, royalty free, you don't have to worry about it. I'm just going to hit download. And for the foreground, since I don't have a portrait of a player like this on hand, I'm just going to use this portrait of a guy I found. Again, off of Unsplash, completely free to use, royalty free. And I'm going to just drag our background onto our document. I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. That's looking pretty good. And I'm just going to drag our portrait on and scale him up as well. And I'm going to drag both of these layers to the very top of my document so they're easy to see. I'm going to hide the photo for now. So let's go back to what we had. So on the right side we had this clipping mask that we created. And now we have this image that we want to put on top of that clipping mask. That's pretty simple to do. Just go in between the two layers, hover over the line in the middle, and hold Alt and click. And you'll now see the image is restricted to the confines of the layer below it. Now we're going to go back to the portrait that we have. There are tons of ways to cut out a portrait like this, and I'll even create a separate video in the future just talking about all of the different ways. In sports design, there's a huge debate between using a pen tool or using the quick select tool. And again, there are so many ways to do it. You could even just use an eraser and erase all of the parts that you don't want. But I'll create a separate video in the future talking about some of those ways and the pros and cons of what each way has. So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. For now, I'm going to use this button called the quick select tool, the object selection tool. And if you haven't seen this button before, aren't familiar with it, essentially Adobe Photoshop will use AI to understand what part of the image you want to keep and what part you don't want to keep, which is super helpful in this scenario. So I'm just going to click and drag over my portrait and then let go. And you can see it selected my image pretty much entirely. Now, of course, if I was really doing some detailed work, I'd go through and clean up some of the lines and things like that. But for right now, this is looking pretty good. If you don't have this button in your version of Photoshop, no worries at all. Just update to the latest version and it'll be included in that. So now that I have my dashed lines surrounding my selection, I'm just going to go down and press this button right here, the Add Layer Mask button. And what that'll do is just cut out my image. But then the nice thing about doing it this way versus just like erasing a background layer is you can actually select this thumbnail to the right of our layer. And let's just choose a brush for a second. Now I'm just going to choose a hard round brush and decrease the size. So let's say I wanted to clean this up a little bit later. And you can see in this thumbnail, it's either black or white. So if I have a black brush and I just paint over my image, it'll erase every area that's in black. And if I have a white brush, it'll reveal every area in white. Super helpful. It's a nice way of being able to clean up your mistakes that you might have made but didn't catch originally. Now before we move on, I want to give this a little bit more of a polished look. The image looks good enough, but I'm just going to go into Filter and hit Camera Raw Filter. And I'm going to scroll down to Clarity, and I'm just going to turn that up to about 34. And that's looking pretty good. And if you notice, it just really enhances some of the detail on the image and gives it a nice kind of polished look to it. I'm going to hover between the line between the stadium that we just dropped in and our cutout. And again, just hold Alt and click. And you can see our cutout is now only in the area contained by our clipping mask. Let's go back to our Fresno State design real quick. Now you'll notice they have a little bit of a blur in the background of their image, creating a little bit of a depth effect. That's super easy to do. I'm going to select our stadium layer and then go up to Filter, Blur, and select Gaussian Blur. And we can play around with how blurry we want it, but something like that works for me. And that just about does it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to leave your comments on what you'd like to see next down in the video. We're always looking to expand what we do on this channel, and we'd love to hear some of your feedback. Until next time.